Dr. Lutzer, I've always thought that is presumptuous and dangerous that pastors would so ignore the fact that God still does visit judgment, and He's directing these things. He's directing the events, and He has His hand on us, yes, but we just can't sit back and say, well, everything's all is well just because we're Christians. But we certainly see this a lot and hear this from all sides. And I've said so often on the air, but I've got to repeat it here, that the pastor who sticks with the Word of God preaches the entire counsel of it, speaks in the way that your messages are in this series, talks about hell and those kind of things, warns people. He's hamstrung by the so many other pastors in his particular locale who are preaching only the feel-good parts of the Bible for fear of losing people from the seats in his church. And so we just got to stand and stick with the Word of God.
We really do, but I don't want to be overly critical, because I know there's some pastors who don't preach the hard truth because their argument is, if I do, it'll cut me off from the people who have to be won to Christ. So if you want to win people to Christ, you have to stay positive. You have to continue to preach those things where they can see immediate benefit from a sermon, etc. But at the same time, that's not being faithful to the Word. When I read the Old Testament prophets, when I read about the anger of God against sin, and by the way, He hates sin a whole lot more than I think most of us realize. When I read that, I say, how can pastors neglect so much of the Word of God? And I believe also in felt need preaching. But my point is that when people are standing in the day of judgment, at that great white throne judgment, at that moment, their felt need is going to be for the righteousness of Jesus Christ, which they will not have. And so, it's not just a matter of immediate felt needs. We as pastors have to think about the future and the felt needs in eternity. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we have to preach the whole thing, even though it is so hard. I've often thought to myself, Jonathan Edwards wouldn't recognize today's church. When you think of his famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, it's not that I think we should always be preaching judgment. There are pastors who like to do that too, and they become very negative, and you're always hearing judgment. But what we have to do is to get people lost before we get them saved. This has really helped clarify my mind.